Okay, so this is a direct quotation. Well, I'm just going to say what I think the question is. So it says over here that the sentence to be put to death if not observing Shabbat. Do you remember emailing me that question?
Yes.
How do you deal with that? That's kind of the question. So let's just get the terms, of the question. What I think you're asking. I think you're asking that it doesn't seem reasonable that if someone, plucks a sapling out of the ground, that they should be executed. It doesn't seem like it's an executable offense. Is that the question?
No, there's more to it.
There's more to the question. What's the question?
More to it was the fact that we don't do it.
We don't do it.
Well, why was it even mentioned? I mean, there'd be nobody left.
Why do you say the reason why it's not done today? Of course, is because the Jewish law is not practiced. Right? The only way for the Jewish law to be practiced is if Jews have sovereignty over Israel, and the Jewish law is the law of the land, not common law like it is today.
When you
and
say Jewish law, you mean
Torah law, biblical.
Like Sharia for the Muslims.
It's not going to involve Sharia here. I don't know anything about Muslim law. I mean, it's the law that the Torah outlines many laws. It's a comprehensive law book primarily, and the laws are relating to everything from interpersonal laws, like what to do when someone steals from someone else, or there's even the claim of theft, or property laws, and the kind of laws that we have today. And then there's also the ritual law, the kind of the spiritual laws. The laws of Shabbat, and the laws of purity, and the laws of sacrifices, etc. But the Torah gives us a comprehensive law guide for every potential situation in the world. Additionally, it gives us the laws of how we practice law. How do we adjudicate this? Different kinds of courts and how they're constructed, and who could be a judge and who could be witnesses, and the processes and the cross examinations, and the three different kinds of courts: a 3-person court, a 23-person court, a 71-person court, and how they engage and how they approach whatever scenario, whatever legal situation is brought to them. So that's what we mean. When we say Torah law, we mean it's everything, and that's the way it was practiced. Now, another supposition in your question, Bernie, was that this was never practiced. Well, in fact, in the Torah itself, just in the narrative of the Torah, it talks about the guy who was collecting twigs. Remember that guy?
One that was put to death.
And he was put to death. Right. That's right. So to say that it never happened, that's a little bit of a stretch.
I don't mean it never happened. I'm just saying it just didn't make sense that particular thing. Yes, it was overkill. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the question. Because the question is, how is it a proper response to that violation? Now, I think we could think of other things. We could think of other. I guess idolatry. Well, idolatry, I think we understand, because idolatry is a complete repudiation of anything Jewish. But they practice capital punishment for adultery. I think in today's day and age, adultery is, it's not as frowned upon as it was in yesteryear, in years past.
Janet, you could say that it might deter a lot of people from doing it.
Yeah, but I think that's a reflection of an attitude.
Yes, but the proof for it is huge. I mean, you have to have more than just the people present. You have to have witnesses.
Yeah, witnesses. You have to have forewarning, and they have to pass the cross-examination. Right. So the laws of actually adjudicating are very, very complex, and they're designed to make sure that everyone gets that everyone.
That is interesting. How do you, not to get to the weeds too much in this, but how do you have witnesses to an actual act of adultery? Is that unless you were having orgies? How do you,
which, by the way, that would invalidate the witnesses themselves if they're participating,
well, you
right?
could have somebody observing, I guess.
Yeah, so that's why it's very unlikely for this to have happened. But no decision in court, no decision could be made, no case could be made unless there was witnesses. So how that happens, that probably once again lowers the frequency rate of these things actually happening, of course. But I think today, like you said, like in the United States, the only thing that we could execute someone for, I think, is murder. Is that right?
Some states used to have, and our attorney maybe could pick up But some states actually used to have, like I know Georgia, there was a Supreme Court case. Georgia had the death penalty for rape at one time. Well, yeah, I read that in college.
Well, we know that maybe treason as well.
Treason,
Like
yeah.
Julius and Ethel.
Well, yeah, and
Ethel, what a name. Thank God they got rid of it, right?
They were fall guys.
Ethel.
no, they were guilty.
Yeah, Khrushchev's papers came out or something.
It seems like they were guilty, but not quite as
One was
guilty.
guilty more than the other.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah, that made
the husband is one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Either way, when the Torah gives us these laws, it's presented in perspective. So, to the Torah, at least to the Torah's view, adultery is a big no-no. It's a huge no-no, and as is murder as well, of course. But either
I
way,
see adultery as far as capital punishment for adultery much more than I could for not keeping.
okay, but I'm saying, but that's I understand. But my point is that I'm just expanding your question to say that the perspective that we have today doesn't align, well, certainly with Shabbat. You know, it doesn't make sense that you should have someone outside the synagogue and Beth Yeshurun just executing everyone who's driving the shul on Shabbat, right? That doesn't seem. And even things which maybe make a little bit more sense, like adultery, that seems a little bit like a stretch for us. But I will want to point out that in ancient times, murder, or at least executing someone or killing someone for even minor offenses, that wasn't a big deal. We find this great story about Pharaoh and Abraham. So Abraham comes, he's traveling to Pharaoh, and he tells his wife Sarah, "You're so beautiful. Okay, let's make believe you're my sister. Because if I say you're my wife, they'll kill me, right? Why would they kill him if she's his wife?
Because then she'd be free.
She'd be free. So to them, what does that tell us about their perspective? To them, adultery was a huge no-no. But murder was okay, which is interesting how that kind of flips. So I think the response to your question is like this. So we know in the year 15 of the Common Era, the court, the Sanhedrin, the year 30, 15 is where it is in the page in Shabbos. Sorry, in the year 30, so 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the Sanhedrin they left Jerusalem. Now, one of the prerequisites of a Jewish court meting out capital punishment is that the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, has to be in Jerusalem. If the Supreme Court is not in Jerusalem, no matter if there's other established courts elsewhere, they cannot execute anyone. Now, why did they leave Jerusalem? Voluntarily. Right? The temple was still in session. The Jewish people still had a very strong community there. So why did they leave? They left because by leaving, they ensured that no one can give out capital punishment. Right? Because once they forced the hand, basically. Now, the Talmud tells us the reason why they did that is because there was a prevalence of murder. We know that at this time, we talked about the history classes, at this time there was an uptick in violence, and therefore they were being way too busy. The courts were being way too busy dealing with capital crime cases, and therefore they left. Now, you would think, and isn't that the opposite of perhaps of what you should be doing? Like, if there's a greater need, if there's more crime, well, then you should have more justice.
Well, they didn't agree with that. Obviously, they didn't agree with capital punishment.
So this sheds light on what the attitude is for Jewish adjudication of capital punishment. The only situation that capital punishment is or the system is designed that capital punishment should be so rare that it should almost never happen. In fact, the Talmud says that if a court kills once every 7 years, it's a bloody court. And the other opinion says once every 70 years. These laws are designed for a nation that views Shabbat observance as such an important thing, and desecration as such a terrible thing that should, that's unbelievable. Obviously, it's a very, very pious generation. That to them, it was Shabbat, desecration was so, it was so anathema that if it would happen, it would change the world. It's once every 7 years. Oh gosh, this would be the biggest story. That's the laws are not designed the laws are not designed to be, the punishments of the laws are not designed to be fulfilled and played out often. Thus, if the nation is not on the level where this is a rarity, well, then the Jewish law will wear out. We close up shop. This is not designed for that kind of nation. So you say, how can you execute someone for Shabbat desecration? Well, you could if that was something that was tantamount to murder. Well, now it isn't. It's not tantamount to murder. So therefore, for us, we don't have that.
Rabbi, if it's not tantamount to, this is something I personally have always wrestled with, because I personally support the death penalty for murder in today's world, but I've always had a problem with non-murder type of offenses, and particularly in our scriptures. So when you say the system was designed, but the Torah says one thing, and the system is kind of contradicting it, isn't it?
How's that?
Well, if the Torah gives the example of putting someone to death for gathering sticks,
Yes.
then that is the supreme law of the land, so to speak.
Yeah.
Then by finding some excuse not to do it, aren't we supposed to build a fence around the Torah?
Yeah, so it's also important that if the only way someone can actually get executed is if they're kind of asking for it, means if they're deliberately and egregiously sinning. Like we know that that you have to warn. We said if someone has to have two witnesses who warn them. What's the nature of the warning to someone who's about to commit a capital offense? You should know that if you do that, you're going to get executed, right? And that has to be immediately preceding the activity, the act. Now, what if the person's silent, right? And they do that aforementioned act, then they're not liable to be executed. They have to say, yes, I know I'm doing it, and I'm doing it despite of that. It has to be spiteful. It has to be egregiously spiteful. So that is an example of the story of the gathering sticks is an example of someone who fulfilled all the characteristics, and you're coming directly after getting the Torah, Mount Sinai, and the Ten Commandments, and everyone was clear about that. This is obviously a rotten apple. This is someone who is saying, I was there at Mount Sinai with everyone else. I heard the Ten Commandments. I heard observe the Shabbat. That's part of the Ten Commandments. It's the fourth commandment. And I'm spiteful. And you know what? People warn me. I'm doing it anyhow. This is someone that the Torah says we don't want in our communities, and it's better for them to get an atonement. But to answer your question, at the core of the law, the law remains. The law doesn't change. But our participation in the court, taking a stance in punishing people, that is only designed for an instance where it's very rare. Because it's a reflection of the truth be told, why are we taking the stance? Like, why we're the ones who are in charge of God's agenda. If God doesn't like someone, let Him take care of it. What's the role of the court? The role of the court is in a situation, in a scenario, in a community where the quality and the character, the piety of the nation is so high. They're the ones who are at the doors ensuring that's maintained. But once it's all chaos and once no one's following the Torah or there's a dramatic departure from the Torah, and it's a subject of ridicule and people are not involved. Well, then that's not their job. That's not their job is to foist upon a unwilling people observance.
The law, they're not changing the law. They're just setting a high standard of evidence for proving whether or not the law has been violated.
That's.
And if it has the effect of making the law less likely to be enforced, I think that's kind of the argument you're making, is that by making it difficult to actually execute somebody for doing this, you're weakening the commandment. I feel like that's what you're saying.
Well,
You're weakening the structure.
Yeah.
The punishment is, I guess the punishment is one of the 613 commandments, is it not?
Yeah.
Well, the laws of the court and laws of jurisprudence and laws of establishing a court system, that's part of the 613 commandments. However, capital punishment, that element where we actually execute people for certain offenses, that there are some caveats to that's only done in a certain setting, a certain scenario.
It's a high standard.
Very high standard for that.
It's
Definitely.
difficult to prove it.
Why didn't the Sanhedrin just say we're not going to do this anymore and stay in
Well, because they're not the only ones. Remember, they're not the only ones who are. They're the 71-person court. They don't even see capital punishment cases, besides for the very, very rare cases. But the actual, if someone commits murder in, I don't know, in Hebron or in Shechem or in Afula or wherever, they go to the local court. There's a local 23 justice court that they engage in capital punishment. So if they didn't leave, then any court had the rights, if they wanted, to engage in capital punishment cases.
They invalidate the jurisdiction.
Exactly. Yeah. So they left. They went to move out of town. Which, by the way, very important, historical thing. If the Jews killed JC, there's a problem because we know that the Jews actually that the court was not in session adjudicating capital punishment cases in the year 34. We know that for sure. So maybe they came back. That's one of the arguments presented. Maybe the court came back because, provided the temple's still there and the Sanhedrin is still convened, all they need to do is go back to Jerusalem. Once they're back in Jerusalem, well, then any court can engage in capital punishment.
That's an interesting. I didn't know. You're saying the Sanhedrin was not in session when Jesus was being tried?
Well, we know that they left in 30. And they left, and they were already in Yavne by the time the 70 came around. Different city. So the question is, if they did it, we know that if the Jews did it, they would have done it as per the Jewish law. Jewish law mandates that the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, has to be in Jerusalem in session for any court across the world to engage in capital punishment cases.
You're saying that it would have not happened the way it was described.
Unless the Sanhedrin came back to Jerusalem. They made a special exception and said, okay, we're reconvening in Jerusalem in order to adjudicate this case.
And we have no evidence that happened.
Not necessarily. I have found some sources that said that for special cases they did come back to Jerusalem. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm saying it's an interesting discussion. From the Torah perspective, and from the historical narrative, we know this is documented already from those times that they left. So the question is, did they come back or not? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But no,
Where was the
This would have
definite
happened
year?
so very
not definite. We don't know definite.
Yeah.
But that's ballpark.
I think even from a New Testament perspective, it's not like JC was being tried for violating Jewish law. They were under Roman rule, and it was a question of tyranny charges against, not tyranny, but basically
Treason.
Roman charges for treason and for trying to instigate a rebellion against the Roman
That
government.
was part of it, but wasn't part of it, Andrea, the blasphemy that the Sanhedrin believed?
It was the high
claiming to be.
priest. It was a high priest at the time.
No,
who
I
had
understand.
basically bought the position.
Yes.
From what I understand.
Yes.
Basically, there was a corrupt priesthood in the temple. He'd essentially bought the position, and then and this is my memory of the New Testament, they went to Pontius Pilate and said, hey, this guy's speaking out against Rome. You should have him murdered. He's trying to stir up a revolt against our leadership, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but the fact that there was Roman control over Israel doesn't mean that the Jews didn't have their court systems.
Yeah, they
because
did.
the Romans kind of let the local populace self-govern.
But that method of death is not Jewish.
Yeah, that's for
That's
sure.
not
Roman.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
However,
And Pontius Pilate had essentially had the final say. And there's the whole, I wash my hands of this, you decide. But he was the guy, he was the governor. He was making the call from a legal standpoint at that point.
yeah, but just to throw out another little curveball here, it's possible that even if I don't know, none of us know the real answer, right? We don't know if this guy even existed. We have no historical.
Well, yeah, but there's
Well, we're not going to go down this argument.
It was
There's,
a composite.
right, we're not going to go down this road. But I want, I'll continue a second. Go ahead, John.
Sanhedrin.
Yes.
There's probably some good people in there. They weren't all ball off. And
Yeah.
it's my opinion they're looking out for their own people because the Romans could go down the road and kill a Jew. Who the hell cares? Sorry. Not now. If you get this radical guy going, if this JC was legitimate, if that's true, you get this radical guy going, he's going to stir up the Romans, and the Romans are going to have a bloodbath. So they had to do something.
Well, yeah, there's always.
Maybe, I don't know, that's a legitimate argument.
And then getting killed by the government. It's not, it's not like Jesus was the only guy walking around with
That's right.
followers saying, hey, I'm the Messiah, hey, I'm the king, hey,
He's the
let's
head
revolt
man,
against
though.
Rome.
He's the head man. He's
Against
a mouthpiece.
Well, no, but it happened all the time.
Yeah, that's
there were
why-
lots and lots of people just like him, and it all happened exactly the same
but
way. It just,
the others may not have attracted the number of followers that he was attracting.
Well,
Apparently
the
not.
others
Yeah.
were not selected by Constantine and then turned into a gigantic.
Yeah, remember
worldwide
the
religion.
religion
And then spread across the world, across the empire.
hundreds of
on
years
pain of
after he's
death.
dead. You know.
Right, and I mean, and these books were,
Was this new religious teaching related with the called Christianity? Was it a really existential threat to the Jews who want to Judaism?
Not
Or it was just
well.
common mainstream?
It was, but it wasn't the biggest of its kind. You know, someone mentioned here the corruption of the high court, like the Sadducees. They were a much bigger influence, a much bigger existential threat to Judaism. They, a much bigger population. They weren't the majority; they were still the minority. Even the Essenes were bigger, and all these different groups, all these splinter sects that sprung out, all these different sects and sectarian infighting that happened amongst the Jewish people. You know, a lot of them they sprung off to become their own religion. They started off as being Judaism with a twist, and eventually they pivoted away and became their own religion, or they disappeared. Christianity is the biggest one that has survived till now. Sadducees are gone, but at the time they were by far probably the smallest threat of them all.
But it's probably the fate of any major religion. Look at Christianity that have so many different denominations. Islam.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about Hinduism, but I assume that some of that stuff. It's just historical things. Some of them branch out and become stand as their own. Some of them disappear. But you're saying that it was important.
Well,
enough
remarkably,
for the government of some headline or something.
maybe.
So,
I'm saying that. I'm making the argument. I'll make it very clear. I don't know what happened. I'm just saying that this adds another wrinkle to that story, because if they did execute him at the time, which allegedly they did, then that's what would have happened. And I said there is one source, albeit a medieval source, but a source in Jewish writings, and a substantive source that does say that maybe this did happen. I don't know. That's the right answer.
if not death penalty, coming back to the first,
Yes.
what was the second most severe punishment? Obviously, they didn't have life imprisonment.
No, they didn't have any imprisonment. There was a no imprisonment. They had
They just let people
the
go.
only time there was imprisonment. And I want to also dovetail back to the question that Steve brought up. The only time they would have imprisonment was for an accused murderer until the trial. You know, we don't want to have murderers running around until the trial.
So if you cannot conduct a murder trial, what would happen to the accused?
Well, if you cannot conduct, why would you not be able to conduct?
You said you cannot.
Well, then they say, we'll leave it up to the local authorities, whatever, the Roman procurator and proconsul, whatever, let them deal with it. We're out. We're not doing that. We'll do civil, we'll do criminal, like smaller time criminal cases. No capital cases for us. Let the Romans govern them, or the local, whatever, whoever's in charge.
They would say we will not.
They abdicated. They say we're not taking care of this element of
We will not do death penalty, but we will have Roman.
yeah.
It's like Shabbos.
Yeah, well, not quite, but
I mean,
but I want to point out here
right,
that
like Rome may have said, no, you can't do this.
you know
Rome
we
could say, yes, you can prosecute it. It's I mean, we have the same sort of thing set up in our courts today. Certain courts can hold certain cases, and other stuff gets sent off to another court. Like it's a very common thing. So it's more likely that Rome said, okay, Jews, you can handle petty theft amongst your people, but if somebody's going to die, send it to us.
sense. But I want to point out that I did mention that there's a lot of hoops that someone needs to jump through, or that a court needs to jump through to actually execute someone. But truth be told, that with regards to a murder is treated differently than all other accused. Like, for example, if someone is accused of, let's say, death for the Shabbat, or adultery, or any one of the other cases, whatever it may be, we don't really have a victim. It's like a crime against God. A crime against God, let God deal with it, as opposed to when there's a victim and there's a danger to potential, to future victims. If you have a murder, God forbid.
Adultery. Well,
Adultery.
I guess that's not a rape would be a victim. But
Yes.
adultery, adultery could be
Right, but there's nothing that's as irreversible as murder. So the Talmud does say that, let's say we have a procedural problem that prohibits us from executing someone. Like, for example, there's two witnesses, the witnesses are 100% kosher witnesses. They happen to have not seen together. Like one guy saw the murder, another guy saw the murder, but they saw from different windows, or they didn't see at the same time, or they warned him, but they warned him 3 seconds beforehand, not 1 second beforehand, or they warned him, but he didn't set upon himself the testimony, or they got mixed up a little bit. Was it 4:30 in the afternoon, or was it 5:30 in the afternoon? One guy didn't have the daylight savings time, some sort of procedural problem. Then we still won't let the guy go, even though we won't execute him. But we will kind of manipulate it in a way that he'll actually die. So like they say, they feed him certain foods, they keep him in a closed cage, and they give him like stale bread, and then they give him lots of barley, and then it kills him.
To the rest of the prisoners.
No. But the point is that we're kind of handcuffed because we cannot execute him if the procedural requirements are not met. However, we don't want to have someone that we know for sure is a murderer let back on the street, and we'd love to get away. So that's one case that we might execute someone, but not directly, indirectly. We'll feed him certain foods and let him kind of kill himself, and this is not tough for anything else. Like we said, because this is an example of between man and man. When a sin between man and man is number one, a sin against another man, but it's a double sin because it's a sin against God as well. Thus, a sin against man and man is essentially worse than a sin against man and God, between man and God, because there's two kind of victims. God's not the victim, but it's two aggressions, one against your fellow man and one against God. God says, "Don't not steal," right? So you're transgressing against God, and there's also the victim. So murder is obviously the worst thing you could do to someone else is to kill them. That's why they're treated very harshly. So you'll say, well, we don't want to have a situation where murderers are getting off because of procedural problems. You had no access to that. You were not allowed to take that evidence or whatever kind of nonsense we have today. That lets murderers, and they go and they murder other people. That's not being tolerant. That's not being compassionate, etc.
And honestly, before we move on, going back to the perceived unfairness in death penalty for adultery and death penalty for breaking the Sabbath, I see no conflict in those two things because they're essentially, they're the same because they're both about violating a covenant relationship. Adultery, you are violating the marriage covenant and you are, sullying a covenant relationship between you and your spouse. And then there's also reference, I think it's in Hosea, that God views the Jewish people as a spouse. That he will betroth himself to you and take himself unto you, or take you unto himself as a bride. And so theoretically, Shabbat and keeping the Sabbath is a piece of the marriage covenant between the Jewish people and God. And so when you violate that, you violate that covenant. The same way you would violate your marriage covenant by having an adulterous relationship. And so it's actually the same thing.
And we know that's part of our liturgy on Shabbat is it's kind of compared to a wedding, welcoming the Shabbos bride. Exactly.
I have a factoid.
Yes.
Okay, Julia and Rosenberg and his wife got shanghaied. They were the fall guys because Stalin told Truman if he did not reveal that atomic bomb secret to him, he was going to starve to death all that Eastern Europe that he conquered. Okay? And there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it because he had about 40, 50 divisions over there. Now look at the Ukraine. It was easy to do that in the Ukraine, starve a whole bunch of people because they didn't play ball. So I want you to know
Where did you hear this?
called me up and Stalin did it.
Yeah, that's what
In
seriously. I mean, that